Well, there's a couple parallels. The first is the spike in protectionism. We saw that in the decade or so prior to the start of World War I. You had countries that were very interdependent and were very wary about it, so they started raising tariffs across the board. You saw the creation of trade wars, in fact. Austria and Serbia at the time had a trade war. Germany and Spain did, Austria and Romania, and Germany and Russia interdependence pretty much collapsed as well. And there was also a breakdown in central bank cooperation also in terms of the gold standard. And all of these things essentially didn't start the war, but what they did was make war a greater possibility, that essentially the sort of major powers, particularly in Eastern Europe, Russia, the Habsburgs, and Germany, weren't reliant on each other all that much. And so as a result, the idea of going to war didn't seem all that scary to them. And in some... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking through this with Michelle here as well, which is to say that we have these trade wars, Michelle. We have sort of this nationalism movement. It makes me think a little bit about the founding of the European Union, which was also meant to be a way after World War II to begin with, I think, a steel alliance and said, OK, we're going to foster trade among these countries that will ultimately lead to political integration and an end to war. And is that what makes some of the trade issues today seem a little bit more alarming by comparison?
So you're right. The European project was absolutely about preventing a World War II. And I buy Mr. Drezner's premise generally. His piece is very good at showing how interconnected economic issues are to contemporary war as we've known it, right? And the premise being that if there is a reduction in economic connectedness, then there's a reduction in incentives to keep the peace, and then there's less resistance to actually going to physical war. I buy that generally, and I think you're right. That's the whole issue. That was the whole motive behind the European project. I would say it's trade wars are necessary, but not sufficient to lead to full-on war. There are other requirements, but certainly you wonder if it is a foreboding of what could come.
And you mentioned something I thought was really interesting, which is the conflict in a way has already broken out on the cyber front. And how serious is that? Because in a way, while we know it can have catastrophic results, no one seems really ready to say cyber war is the equivalent to all-out war.
So if we're asking the question, can a trade war lead to a real physical war? What does physical war actually look like these days and in the future? And military experts say it's actually a hybrid war. Yes, kinetics on the ground, boots on the ground, but also a cyber war. And we've been in a cyber war. The general media focuses very much on the cyber war with Russia, but the business community has long focused on the cyber issues with China and their theft of intellectual property, both via computers, via the digital technology, but also physical stealing of, everything possible by sending in employees or fake employees and spies, et cetera.
Right, like what happened at T-Mobile. So, Dan, Michelle mentions this hybrid war concept, and because we're talking about it, I might as well ask how the nuclear age kind of hangs over all of this. When you talk about a repeat or this leading to World War III, what kind of war are you talking about?
Well, I would rather not imagine that fully because it's a scary prospect. One way in which the current moment is different from the previous one is, in fact, the existence of nuclear deterrence, which didn't exist prior to World War I. But that said, even in terms of the evolution of nuclear doctrines, the fact that you're seeing the breakdown in arms control between the United States and Russia, the fact that you're seeing both sides talking about developing low-yield nuclear weapons sort of lowers the taboo against the use of nuclear weapons by both sides' militaries. And the other thing I would add on the cyber front is that in some ways, one of the differences between now and 100 years ago, which is actually scarier now, is that the norm of what starts a war is different. Back in those days, countries declared war on each other. They were very explicit about it. Now there's this range of possible activities, including cyber activities, which don't seem exactly like the declaration of war, but could potentially lead in that front.
Yeah.
So, and furthermore, the other problem, I think, on the cyber front is this perception of sort of winner-take-all, the sort of fusing of national security concerns with economic concerns. And I think the battle over Huawei and 5G is the best example of that.